New Mexico Territory. 1877. The wind kicked up dust across the high desert plains as the sun dipped low over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, casting long shadows over the trail. Catherine Zane reined in his horse at the edge of a dry creek, his eyes narrowing at the figure stumbling along the cracked earth ahead. She looked like she'd been walking for miles, boots torn, skirts dusty, hair tangled from the wind. But it was the way she walked that caught him. Not like someone lost, like someone done running. He clicked his tongue and rode closer. "Miss," he called out. She turned, squinting against the sun, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I got nowhere to go." Catherine dismounted slow, steady, and took off his hat. "You got me now, do not you?" She stared at him a long moment, like she was trying to decide if he was real. Then her knees buckled. He was at her side before she hit the ground. Her name was Coralie Sutton. 21. He learned that later after he carried her to his cabin 2 miles west and coaxed water down her throat. She did not say much at first, just that she had come from Texas, that she had walked for days, and that there was no one left waiting for her. He did not press. He knew the look in her eyes, hunger and heartbreak. He had seen it before in his own mirror, years after the war. His cabin was small but clean. 1 room, a cot for her, and he moved to the floor without a word. She tried to argue, weak as she was, but he just shook his head. "You need rest," he said. "I will be right here." He made her stew that night, and when she asked why he was helping her, he just said, "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it." Coralie did not cry, but her eyes stayed damp for a long time as she ate. By the 4th day, she was stronger. She helped sweep the porch and fed his mare while he patched the roof. She was quiet but not cold, and when she smiled just a little, he caught himself staring. She caught him once. "What is your name?" she asked that evening, watching the firelight flicker across his face. "Catherine," he said, setting down his coffee tin. "Catherine Zane." "Thank you, Catherine," he nodded. "You can stay as long as you want." That night she did not sleep on the cot. She curled up on the old rocking chair near the stove, watching the embers fade. He let her be. A week passed. She did not speak of her past, but he pieced together what she did not say. She had family once. A father who gambled too hard, a man who hit too fast. A baby brother buried in the red Texas dirt. He found her one morning sitting by the creek, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Did you lose someone?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Too many." He sat beside her, said nothing. After a long silence, she whispered, "Do you ever stop feeling alone?" He looked at her, sunlight catching her hair like fire. "You do not feel so alone when someone stays." Their eyes locked. For the first time, she did not look away. It was not love yet, not quite. But something was growing between them in the space of quiet mornings and shared coffee. In the way he handed her tools without asking, and the way she folded his shirts without a word. In the way her eyes softened when he spoke, and how he watched her like she might vanish if he blinked. Then came the storm. It rolled in fast black clouds, cold wind, and thunder that cracked the sky wide open. Catherine was out checking the fence when the first bolt struck, and Coralie ran through the rain to find him, calling his name. He was limping when she reached him, a twisted ankle from the mud. She looped his arm around her shoulders and hauled him back toward the cabin, soaked to the bone. Inside, she helped him to the cot, shivering. "You should not have come out," he said through clenched teeth. "You are the only thing I have," she said, her voice shaking. "I was not going to lose you too." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she kissed him. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was a kiss that said thank you and do not leave and I see you. When she pulled back, he touched her face, his hand rough and warm. "You are not alone anymore, Coralie," he said. "You got me now, do not you?" She nodded, her lips trembling. "Yes," she whispered. "I got you." and for the first time in years she believed it. The ankle healed slow, but the days grew fuller in its quiet way. Coralie began tending the vegetable patch along the fence line, coaxing life from dry soil the way she seemed to coax calm into the house. Catherine fixed the jammed hinge on the smokehouse door and sharpened the tools she'd taken to using without asking. The rhythm between them was unspoken, but steady like water smoothing stone. One morning, after a frost had silvered the sage at sunrise, she came in with her arms full of kindling and her cheeks flushed from the cold. "There's a man down the ridge," she said, setting the bundle by the hearth. "Pass me on the trail." Asked if this was Zane's homestead. Catherine paused at the stove, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Did he say anything else?" Said he'd be back before nightfall. Had a rifle slung over his shoulder and wore a badge under his coat. She met his eyes. "You expecting lawmen?" He set the spoon down slow. "Not in years." Coralie stepped closer, fingers brushing the table's edge. "Should we be worried?" He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, but I'll be ready." She didn't ask what he meant. Just reached for the rifle, leaning behind the door, and checked the chamber like she'd done it 100 times. He watched her with something quiet behind his eyes. "I used to keep watch for my father," she said, rolling the cylinder, "when he didn't come home sober." That night the lawman came. He rode up just after dusk, lantern swinging from his saddle. Catherine stepped out onto the porch as Coralie stayed in the doorway behind him, hand resting near the rifle. "Zane?" the man asked, voice low but firm. "That's me." The lawman dismounted, boots crunching over gravel. "Name's Deputy Harlan. I'm out of Las Vegas." Catherine didn't move. "What brings you this far south?" "Looking for a man who rode with the 32nd Missouri, fought under Captain Lyle. You him?" "I was." The deputy nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. "This came for you. Took me 3 weeks to track you down." Catherine took it but didn't open it. The lawman tipped his hat. "No trouble, just a message. Good night to you both." After he rode off, Coralie stepped beside him. "You going to read it?" He turned the envelope in his hands, the paper worn at the creases. "Not tonight," he said softly. "Not yet." She didn't press, just reached for his free hand, and he let her take it. The next morning, after the sun had lifted the fog from the mesa, he opened the letter. It was from a widow in Missouri. Said her husband had died in the spring, and among his things was a journal with Catherine's name in it, a name he'd written about often. She said her husband had called Catherine the only man who'd saved him twice, once from a bullet and once from being a coward. Catherine read the letter twice, then folded it back along its worn creases. Coralie was kneeling by the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows. He walked over, crouched beside her. "I thought I didn't leave anything good behind," he said. "Turns out I did." She looked at him, dirt smudged on her cheek, hair tied back with a strip of old calico. "You've still got more ahead." He reached for her hand. "I want to build something steady, not just a roof and walls. I want you in it." Her fingers tightened around his. "I'm not afraid of staying anymore," she said. "Not with you." That night, he cleared a space on the cabin shelf and placed the letter there, beside the tin box of nails and the old wood plane his father left him. A place for what had come before, and for what mattered now. They didn't speak of the past again that week. Instead, they built a fence to keep the mule in, started plans for a second room, and every morning she brought him water before he asked. And every night, he lit the lamp just a little early, so she never had to walk in the dark. The first snow came soft, just a lace dusting over the hills, but it settled into the seams of the land like it meant to stay. Coralie stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest, her breath misting the pain. Catherine was splitting kindling out back, the rhythmic thock of axe against wood steady as a heartbeat. She watched him a long time before she turned away. Inside, the cabin had taken on a lived-in quiet, the kind that made space for two people without crowding either. A strip of dried chilies hung from the rafters now, and a stack of quilt blocks sat folded in the corner where she worked them in the evenings. He'd started carving again, two small things at first, then a set of drawer pulls shaped like cottonwood leaves. That afternoon, while he worked on the porch rail, she packed a bundle of biscuits and dried peaches into a flour sack. "Elias Carver's place is west," she said, tying the top closed. "I heard he don't make it out much since his wife passed." Catherine leaned on the post he was measuring. "You aiming to check on him?" She nodded. "Figure I can spare some food." He set down the hammer. "I'll ride with you." Coralie pulled her shawl tighter. "You don't need to. I want to." They saddled the horses slow, the way folks do when they're thinking more than they're saying. The trail west narrowed through pinyon groves and dry washes, the horses picking their way careful over the frozen ruts. She rode slightly ahead, her braid tucked into her coat, and he watched the way she sat the saddle upright, steady, like she'd known hard rides before. Elias Carver answered the door with a wary squint, but the sight of the food softened him some. He didn't speak much, just nodded and motioned them in. The inside was dim and close with wood smoke and old grief. A single chair near the stove, a pair of boots worn down at the heels, and a framed daguerreotype of a woman set beside a stub of a candle. Coralie didn't say anything about the photograph. She just stepped inside and set the sack near his stove. "I'll come back next week," she said. "Bring some beans and lard if I can spare it." Carver's hand twitched like he might reach for hers, but he just gave a hoarse, "Thank you," and turned back inside. They walked their horses most of the way home. "You didn't ask what happened to his wife," Catherine said after a long stretch of silence. Coralie kept her eyes on the trail. "Wouldn't have mattered. He's still here." It was after dark when they reached the cabin again. The horses were stabled, the door barred against the cold. As she lit the lamp inside, her fingers fumbled with the match. He stepped closer but didn't take over. Just stood beside her, letting her work through the tremble. When the wick caught, she set the match aside. "I used to think I didn't have anything left," she said, voice low. "But it's not true." Catherine didn't speak. He reached for her hand, warm against the back of her knuckles. "You've got me," he said finally. "That's not a little thing." She looked up at him then, eyes steady. "I know." That night she didn't sleep against the stove or curl into the chair. She crossed the room, quiet as snowfall, and laid down beside him. No words, just the sound of her breath, slow and even as her body curved into his. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the silence felt full. The days hardened with winter's weight, sky low and pale as bone. The cabin walls held the warmth decently, but Catherine added fresh chinking between the logs where wind had begun to whisper through. Coralie patched a tear in the quilt using thread from a spool she'd bartered for weeks ago, her stitches straight, efficient. By late January, the river had frozen thick enough to walk across, and Catherine set traps along the far bank while she gathered wood in the cottonwood grove. He taught her how to read the signs: scattered feathers, claw marks in the bark, the hush of game trails under snow. She didn't talk much when they were out there, but he saw the way she carried her weight, now centered, ready. One morning, a rider appeared from the south, leading a mule with a broken harness and a face wrapped against the cold. By the time he reached the porch, Catherine recognized the man from the trading post near Fort Union, Deacon, a wiry fellow with one good eye and a knack for knowing who owed what. Catherine met him outside. "Zane," Deacon called, dismounting stiffly. "Heard you was keeping company out here. Figured you'd want word." Catherine didn't answer right away. Coralie stood just inside the doorway, watching. Deacon leaned against the post. Folk down near Cimarron say there's trouble brewing, cattle drives gone thin, some ranch hands turning to thieving. One of 'em's asking after a girl with a scar above her knee and a father who used to run cards out of San Saba. Catherine didn't move. You tell him anything. I told him to mind his own, but he's heading west. Catherine nodded once, slow. Appreciate the warning. Deacon gave a shrug, then swung back into the saddle. Owe your girl nothing, he said. But you helped me haul my brother out the Pecos when no one else would. I don't forget that. After the rider disappeared into the trees, Catherine stepped inside. Coralie had already sat down by the table, her face unreadable. I knew it'd find me eventually, she said. He poured water into the kettle, set it on the stove. You don't have to run. I'm not scared, she said. But I want to know what you'll do if he shows. Catherine looked at her, then crossed the room, pulled the rifle from its hooks and laid it on the table between them. I'll stand where you stand, he said. That's all. Her eyes didn't soften. They sharpened. Then let's not wait. They didn't speak again until dusk. She packed a satchel with flour and beans, rolled up her spare pair of stockings and tucked the carving knife into the seam. Catherine loaded the horses, checked the saddle straps twice, and tied a lantern behind his bedroll. They rode out before dawn the next day, west toward the low hills that backed up to the old Spanish ruins. No one would think to look there, not in January, not with the snow this deep. They camped where a stone wall had half fallen into the earth, windbreak enough to hold them. Coralie laid out bread while the fire cracked slow, and Catherine unrolled their bedrolls side by side, close against the rock. I used to think if I left a place, I left the worst of it behind, she said. But it's not the leaving that makes it safe. He passed her a tin cup of coffee, dark and bitter. Then what is? Who's beside you when it comes? They ate in silence after that. The wind moved through the mesquite like breath. And when night fell, she curled into his side with no hesitation, her hand resting over his chest like it had always belonged there. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just reached up and laid his hand over hers, and the dark passed quiet without fear. The snow began to melt by early March, carving rivulets through the arroyos and loosening the earth along the slopes. Catherine and Coralie stayed near the ruins until the water ran clear again and the wind shifted warm. No one came. No hoofbeats. No sign of the man Deacon had warned about. And when the days grew longer, they rode back to the cabin, their supplies lighter, their silence easier. The cabin stood just as they left it, the door still barred from inside, the ashes in the hearth cold but undisturbed. Catherine unlatched the shutters while Coralie set down the satchel and began brushing dust from the shelves with the sleeve of her dress. Neither of them said anything for a long time. They didn't need to. That evening, she sat on the porch with a length of muslin across her lap, her needle moving slow and careful through the fabric. He joined her with a tin of oil and the rifle resting across his knees. For a time, the only sound was the rasp of cloth and the soft click of metal under his hands. I was thinking about building a henhouse, he said, eyes still on the barrel. If we're staying through summer. She didn't look up. We are, he nodded once. Then I'll need to trade for lumber, might take a trip toward Mora. She paused in her stitching. I'd come if we could hitch the wagon. I want to see the valley again. He set the tin aside. It's yours to see. They left the next morning, wagon creaking under them, the mare plodding steady along the trail. On the way to Mora, they passed a family camped near the edge of the hills, a young couple with 2 children, and a mule loaded near to collapse. Coralie climbed down without hesitation, offered jerky and a sack of cornmeal while Catherine helped mend the harness with a length of spare leather. When they climbed back into the wagon, Coralie kept her eyes on the road ahead. He glanced over. That was kind. She gave a small shrug. No one ever gave my father help without asking what he'd trade for it. I don't want to carry that forward. At the mill yard, they bartered for pine boards, a box of nails, and a jar of molasses she had fixed her eye on. Afterward, they ate beside the river, boots off, their toes pressed into the cool silt. He passed her a slice of bread with the last of the salted butter between them. You ever think about what it might feel like to have a place that's yours from the ground up? She asked. He looked at her, the way her fingers smoothed the edge of the cloth napkin even when there was no need. I think that's what we're building. Her mouth curved, soft and slow, and she leaned against his shoulder. Then we're near finished. By April, the henhouse stood firm behind the cabin, with 6 hens clucking inside and a rooster loud enough to wake the ridge. Coralie planted beans along the south side, her hands in the dirt before sunrise each day. Catherine sawed boards for a new table, one wide enough for 2 people to sit without brushing elbows. One clear evening, after the last boards had been sanded and the stovepipe cleaned, she came outside with her shawl draped over her arms and a folded paper in her hand. I wrote to that widow in Missouri, she said, offering it to him. Told her you'd gotten the letter and that it mattered. He didn't take the paper, just covered her hand with his. I never thought I'd be the kind of man someone wrote about, he said. You are, she said. You always were. Just took time to find someone who saw it. He pulled her close then, arms around her waist, his chin resting in her hair. You staying, Coralie? She looked up at him. I'm already home. They married under the cottonwoods near the creek, with no preacher but the sky and no vows but the ones they whispered between them. He carved 2 rings from the same piece of walnut, smoothed them with oil, and slid hers onto her hand with fingers that trembled more than he let on. Afterward, they ate bread and honey on the porch, watching dusk settle slow over the land. Years passed, and the fields grew thick with vegetables. The fence held strong, and a cradle stood in the corner of the cabin by the stove, carved by the same hands that had once carried a woman through a storm. The child inside had her mother's quiet eyes and her father's steady hands. The man who'd once asked about Coralie never came. Maybe he'd tired. Maybe he'd found peace elsewhere. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way Catherine reached for her hand before sleep, always in the same way, and the way Coralie spoke his name like it belonged to her lips and no other place. They lived through seasons of drought and bloom, through hail and harvest, through laughter and loss, but never again alone. The cabin stood through it all, a place built not only with pine and stone, but with every quiet promise they'd kept. And when the wind moved through the cottonwoods, it sounded like 2 voices twined together, carrying forward, steady as love.